In the second reading today, we hear Paul talk a lot about faith. The faith is fostered by the witness of the saints, or the witness of others. Paul's trying to help the people that he's writing to see with a new vision the lens of faith. And in doing so, he points to and looks to those who have been witnesses to the faith throughout the ages. The great cloud of witnesses, he calls them, that throughout the ages have attested and been examples of this faith, in order to help us to see through the lens of faith. See, it's really important for us, as Paul reminds the people, that our journey, our walk of faith, is not just a solo journey, but it's part of something bigger. That our faith, our personal faith, is not merely our own, but is something that's been passed on to us, been handed on to us. It's not just a me and Jesus thing, but it's a we and Jesus thing. The faith that we claim is nothing that any of us have invented, but something that's been preserved and passed down to us from generation to generation by faithful witnesses, by faithful people who have passed on the faith, and many times, many who passed it on at great cost. See, the profession of faith we proclaim, the creed we profess, those words, as a priest professor in seminary would often remind us, he said, take those words of the creed seriously, because there is blood on that creed. There is blood on that creed. In other words, people have suffered and died for this profession of faith, this creed that we say, and everything it implies, that statement of faith. That this was handed on down to us throughout the ages. That faith continued to be fostered and inspired by those who boldly lived the faith. That saints always inspired other saints. To be part of this great unfolding story from generation to generation of the great communion of saints. It's interesting if you look at the history of the saints, very rarely do you ever see a solo saint. But many times saints came in groupings and ages and pairs that they'd come together. And so this unfolding story, this unfolding epic of Christ and His church is an ongoing story of which we're a part. We're part of this ongoing unfolding story. You're part of something greater than yourself, this communion of saints. And it's by their witness that our faith is fostered. Now, when we talk about saints, there's different definitions of saints. There's 3 different definitions of the word saint. There's capital S, saint, those who have been formally declared by the church and canonized as declared saints. But there's little s saints, that is, a saint by definition is anyone who is in heaven. Any person who is in heaven. And of course there's many people who are in heaven who haven't necessarily gone through the formal process of canonization. But we probably know some folks who are most likely in heaven. Family, friends, and loved ones who have gone before us with the sign of faith, who have been examples and witnesses of faith to us, and now who are most likely praying for us here and now. And then the third general definition of saints. St. Paul would use the term saints sometimes to refer to the holy ones. Anyone who is currently actively living the faith, he would call the saints in some of his letters. And so, when I say that our faith is inspired by saints, I mean in the fullness of all of those definitions and everything of what that means. And so it's worth reflecting on how our own journeys of faith have been inspired by saints. I've been reflecting on that lately, of how different examples, people's examples of faith, in small ways, have tugged on gradually the trajectory of my own life. It changed directions more and more towards Christ and towards the vocation of priesthood. And many times it wasn't one single moment that I woke up and decided to live this, but by examples, little by little. I think of the examples of formal saints who inspired me, the lives of people like St. Augustine and St. Francis of Assisi, whose writings and words and lives had great impact on my own life. I think the example of my father, my own dad, who growing up, we never necessarily prayed together or talked about faith or what he believed. But every week he made darn sure that we got to church. Every week he would take us to church, and that was a priority. And looking back, the impact that had on me, of that simple witness, to begin to realize that my father took this seriously, then maybe there's something really important here. Because he never did anything without good reason. And then I had siblings, older siblings, who took their faith seriously. And that example, and the way that impacted my life. And then friends and priests. And of course, loved ones who went before me with the sign of faith. My grandmother, who passed away a few years ago, who was a staunch Catholic and an immensely practical woman. She also didn't talk real fluffy about her faith, but for her, Jesus was as real as the sky is blue. And looking back, the impact that had on my own life and journey. And all throughout the ages, or all throughout my life, I should say, how there's been these impacts on us, on me. So I think the scriptures invite us to look with a new vision at our lives. To reflect, to keep vigilant, as the gospel calls us, to watch. But to reflect in that way and how we are part of this communion of saints. So I invite us this week to reflect on your own lives in that way. In what way that your journey of faith has been impacted by the saints, in the fullness of what that means. The different saints you've learned about, the formal saints of the church, they're examples of faith. The examples of faith of the loved ones who have gone before us. And those who are currently actively striving to live their faith in the encouragement that they give day in and day out. Because the more we reflect on that, it allows us to see with a deeper vision of faith. Because it's easy for us, I think, sometimes to get discouraged in our living in the faith. What difference does this make? What impact does this have on the world? Why do I even bother, and why do I try? But to take a step back and to see how we're part of the greater story. There's a line in a song that I love, a song from the movie The Prince of Egypt. And in that, the song Through Heaven's Eyes, he says, there's a line that goes, "A single thread in a tapestry, though its color brightly shines, can never see its purpose in the pattern of the grand design." That is, until, as the chorus then says, until we learn to look at our lives through heaven's eyes. To take the step back, to see that this single thread of our life is part of this great unfolding beautiful story and design. And the more we reflect on and see the ripple effect, the impact of the saints throughout the ages from generation to generation into our own lives, the way that's rippled into and impacted our own lives, and the way that others' acts of faith and charity have impacted our own lives, the more we can begin to see the ripple of effect of our witness. The way all our small acts of faith, our small acts of charity and love, and our small witnesses of faith have a ripple effect into the world around us. To keep this story unfolding, this great epic and beautiful journey of which we're a part. Now we're part of something so much grander and bigger than simply ourselves. And to reflect on this, to see our lives with eyes of faith, for the Lord to be our vision, that we can see how we are a part of this great story of the communion of saints.